our culture is terrified of women. The word hysterical, the Greek origin, means womb. And so there's this patriarchal assumption that if you have a womb, that is a nuisance to your life inherently. It's going to cause you emotional hysteria, pain, suffering. And let's go ahead and trivialize women's experiences of emotionality, because let's face it, the patriarchy is terrified of emotions, because emotions, when you feel them, give you power. How much of our experiences, us just being gaslighted and being taught that, like, no, your experience isn't real, because we're much more likely, we come to doctors in pain, to be considered psychologically fraught, like we're making up our pain and it's not real. We're just hysteric or we're stressed. And it's like, yeah, I am stressed actually, because nobody has taught me how to actually tend to my body. And I see.
We know women make up at least 50% of the population, but only about 30% of neuroscience research includes female subjects. And until 1933, women were largely excluded from clinical trials in the US, meaning that most of the medical and neurological treatments were developed based on male physiology. And the female nervous system is uniquely structured. It's richer in connectivity between hemispheres. It's influenced by different hormonal cycles. And we're wired for social bonding, yet the research often treats the male nervous system as the default. And that leaves women with incomplete or ineffective healing protocols. And we are going to dive into all of this today with an expert on the female nervous system, Veronica Rottman. Welcome to Trauma Rewired, the podcast that teaches you about your nervous system, how trauma lives in the body, and what you can do to heal. I'm your co-host, Elisabeth Christoph, founder of brainbase.com, an online community where we use applied neurology and somatics for behavior change, resilience, and stress processing. And I'm also the founder of the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification course, an ICF accredited course for therapists and coaches and practitioners to really bring lasting transformation by working with the nervous system.
And I'm your co-host, Jennifer Wallace. I'm a neurosomatic psychedelic preparation and integration guide, and I bridge the modalities of nervous system training and regulation into your peak somatic experiences so that you can receive the medicine and the modalities that you are working with. And I'm also one of the educators at the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification. We are so excited to have Veronica Rottman back. She's the founder of the Soma School, a somatic practitioner and an educator who specializes in the female nervous system and its unique needs. And so, Veronica, welcome back to Trauma Rewired. Tell us a little bit, our listeners, a little bit about you and why this conversation is so important to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jennifer and Elisabeth. It's so wonderful to be back in this space with you. I have just been loving everything that you're doing, and I see you as huge pioneers in this world of trauma resolution. So thank you so much. And yes, hello. Hi, I'm Veronica Rottman. I am a somatic trauma resolution practitioner who centers the female nervous system, as Jennifer and Elisabeth mentioned. And whenever I get asked this question, I can't help but go kind of way back, major TBT here, to childhood, because I've always had this love and fascination with the female body. I was like a tiny midwife. I loved hearing birth stories. I particularly love like the grit it takes to be a woman in this world. And I really could see from a young age that we're not just delicate flowers, right? And then I went on with this, innate reverence for women, for the female body, to realize that that was not the common experience for my peers. In fact, the experience of being a little girl in the world was full of stigma and shame and reasons to fear being in the body that we're in. And my trauma, I have a really high ACE score. I think it's like 9 out of 10. Although sometimes the more I do this work and uncover memories that my brain like wouldn't let me remember, I'm like, it might be more like a 10. Anyways, high ACE score, CPTS, and this combination of having a deep love and reverence for bodies and the trauma kind of gave me this inherent sense of like how trauma lived in my body. Yes, I had psycho-emotional symptoms, anxiety, depression, but they very much manifested in my female experience. So in my cycle, I was diagnosed with premenstrual dysphoric disorder. really intense insomnia in my luteal phase, debilitating pain, pelvic pain, menstrual cramps, heavy bleeding that nobody could explain to me. And it wasn't until, fast forward more recently in the last decade when I discovered somatics and actually got to the root of my trauma that my symptoms resolved. But I had to do it. I had to co-create my own way where I took what I learned in somatic experiencing and holistic pelvic care and cyclical embodiment to weave my own way. And so now I am here and I lead trainings and programs in Soma School on the female nervous system because we really need to create this path that doesn't yet exist in somatics and trauma resolution. Unfortunately, it's not being carved out, but I am here to help everyone forge a new way where women are actually included and people in female nervous systems with female nervous systems are included. So that's kind of the gist of it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Veronica. I think a lot of your story is very relatable. And, it's, you've already mentioned a couple things I'm so excited to dive into today, like luteal phase. And, there's so much science is evolving so much around women's research and studies, which is really exciting. But such a significant amount of neurological and medical research has historically been based on male physiology. And we've really been wakening up to that really a lot now, but it's been awakening really since Elisabeth mentioned the 30s. The 60s was a really big boom in women's health and women's wellness and just a little bit more recognition. And so all of this misunderstanding, misdiagnosis, mistreating, just overlooking in general, we've been overlooked so much, and it really has skewed our understanding of how disease and treatments affect women, and how it's directly impacted the quality of care that we receive, and it shapes medical protocols and practices. And like you said, healing spaces. There is not a space that women have not been represented fully in, unless it is a space created by women for women. And so do you want to expand a little bit about that on the history of women's health?
Yeah, I'd love to. So in 1977, the FDA actually created a federal ban on including women of childbearing age in research, in health research. So there were, ethical reasons for this because we run the risk of getting pregnant. And that could potentially, in the middle of doing research, cause harm to a growing fetus, to a mother. And at the same time, you can't just decide, well, let's just leave them out and forget about their bodies, right? I think these are some of our nation's greatest minds. They can probably get a little more creative than that. So there's this law that prohibits us also because we are physiologically more complex. And this physio-complexity is kind of used as a reason to not include us because, people backing up this research, they want the most effective, most fast, most least expensive, right, ways of doing research. And the truth is that because of our physio-complexity, we require more time, right? Because we have this infradian rhythm where there's consistently more fluctuation in our nervous system, in our endocrine system, in all the systems of our body. And that requires more time, energy, and money. So it really wasn't until the Women's Office of Health was created in the 90s, in 1993, that law was overturned. And even then, even though in the 90s, in 1993, this law was overturned, we still are not getting adequate amount of research done on our bodies. And this leads to a lot of harm. Women really pay the price for it. And I know we're going to go through, some of the statistics later on what this means for women, but the Office of Women's Health actually every about 5 years publishes a journal that points out the fact that we're still not seeing enough research being done, even though this was overturned, on women, and that the policies are not changing despite, this overturn. And this is even affecting our higher education. So people in higher education, postgraduate degrees, are reading textbooks that are primarily and mostly exclusively based on the male body. So it really ripples out into so many factors and realms of health and wellness, including somatics, which is, my specialty. And, women experience so much trauma. And there's research that shows that we actually experience more intense symptoms of PTSD, of chronic shame. And I wonder why. Maybe because somatics is not actually tending to our body, right?
If you've ever felt like healing modalities just aren't working for you, like you're stuck in the same cycles no matter how much mindset work you do, you are not broken. It's not about your willpower, it's about your nervous system. At rewiretrial.com, we take you on a 90-day guided journey through applied neurology, somatic emotional processing, and stress training so that you can map your stress response and finally understand what's been keeping you stuck. Heal dysregulation at the root instead of trying to fix behaviors on the surface. Train your nervous system for resilience so that safety and peace come from within. Join us for 2 free weeks inside Rewire and get full access to live daily classes, expert support, and our massive on-demand library of nervous system tools. Start your Rewire journey today at rewiretrial.com.
I wonder why. Maybe because somatics is not actually tending to our body, right?
Yeah, I really want to dive into some of this specifically around like the healing spaces, the somatic world. As someone who's kind of partially somatics and a lot in the world of applied neurology is definitely a very male-centered world. It started out in athletics and performance and in all of these trainings. I mean, it's an amazing system. It has done so much for me, and I've definitely had to work with it to make changes for my unique nervous system, to understand that I'm not always training for performance at different phases in my cycle, that there are times for rest and reparation, and that's going to be a little bit different. Also to weave in more emotional components, and there's just a lot that just isn't there. And so even beyond just the medical paradigm, but in these spaces for healing, it's still that information that's being left out. And I was reading one of your posts on Instagram, and it said, if the female nervous system could talk, she'd say, I'm rich with complexity, multidimensional, and powerful in capacity, but you wouldn't know because somatic models center on male physiology as the standard. And I love this. And I believe you went on to talk about how women's nervous systems ebb and flow, especially in relation to HRV, heart rate variability, and how that affects our trauma rewiring, our somatic healing, our ability to modulate between parasympathetic and sympathetic states. And so I'd love to hear you just elaborate on that a little bit too.
Yeah. So when we approach our trauma resolution, our somatic practices from a male-centric perspective, we're missing an entire layer and context in which we need to consider in order to actually receive adequate resolution, adequate care. And that is our infradian rhythm. It's our menstrual cycle. And this has a whole other meaning when it comes to perimenopause, menopause, the prenatal journey. But for right now, let's just stick to this one experience of our infradian rhythm, just to keep things a little more simple for now. And our heart rate variability shifts with each phase of our cycle. This means that when we have higher heart rate variability, there's more of that natural parasympathetic resilience available to us, during which we might go into more activation, more emotions that feel difficult to process in a titrated way, of course. And then when we have lower heart rate variability, our practitioners, our therapists, our coaches really need to be well versed in knowing, okay, this is going to be a more sympathetic dominant phase. This is very true throughout perimenopause and menopause too. So how much are we throwing women over their edge, their thresholds, in the name of, resolving trauma, when actually they're very much getting pushed past their edge? And this looks like, re-traumatization, and that might seem really intense, but it's it's true. I've seen it happen with clients who come to me and their nervous system is in a state that, they really don't, they were hoping they'd be healed and that instead they're regressed. And there's other such amazing capacities within the female nervous system that aren't being discussed, such as higher neuroplasticity in our luteal phase when we have more brain-derived neurotropic factor, which helps neural pathways rewire and supports their growth. And that becomes available, right, when we're actually considering what is needed in each phase. So yeah, the layers of complexity go on and on. And if you're like me, I'm here for nuance. I'm here for things being layered instead of this like binary polarizing way of seeing our bodies and the systems of our bodies as separate, right? Like this very hyper masculine view of like, here's the nervous system, here's the endocrine system. They have separate functions, two different things. Let's treat them as separate. When in the female body, you see a lot more of this relationality and continuity through systems. And that's true for men's bodies too, for all bodies. But it's just more, I think, rich in ours.
It's really so fascinating to have a deeper understanding of these powerful hormonal shifts that we go through, and the neurological shifts that run in tandem with our hormonal shifts. And you've mentioned, and we've all mentioned already, like there's many cycles that women go through with their hormones. And as we move through life, perimenopause, menopause, pregnancy even, and like when we ignore these changes in our wellness, we are really blocking a true path to our own recovery. And I love the nuances that you get into, because this is where people really find safe spaces of healing, I think, and really a place where we can be understood. Because although we have moved so much historically from the male-centered, there's still so much to understand. And I think one of the things that we've explored a lot on the podcast this season is neurotransmitters and how they shape behavior and healing. And one of the biggest differences between the male physiology and female physiology is the dominance of oxytocin versus dopamine in the female nervous system. And so can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I would love to. So oxytocin is what regulates our systems, our nervous system, our neuroendocrine system. For men, it's dopamine. So oxytocin is a neurotransmitter and hormone that is released by the hypothalamus. And this stimulates the release of follicle-stimulating hormone through the pituitary gland. We need FSH to grow enough estrogen because FSH does what it sounds like it does. It stimulates the follicles within your ovaries to grow and mature and produce estrogen. We need adequate amounts of estrogen in order for our nervous system to be regulated, and we need oxytocin to do that. So when we center oxytocin-based somatic practices, which are elicited through bonding, through connection, touch, through eye gazing, through cuddling, and this, for some people like myself and lots of my clients who have attachment trauma, that's not such a straightforward path to just like, oh, I can cuddle and I feel safe, right? So we often need more self-regulation. So oxytocin-based practices, and I'm rubbing my hands together right now as a demo for yourself that you can do with yourself to regulate first and foremost before contact with others starts to feel safe again. But oxytocin is what increases healthy amounts of estrogen and progesterone, again, which we need to regulate. For men, dopamine increases testosterone. So it works on the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis to increase testosterone. This is what we get when we think about like achievement and going for it and crossing off the to-do list. Exercise, vigorous exercise. And some people hear this and they're like, wait, I shouldn't do any dopamine practices. And I'm like, no, it's not about like quitting your running habit. Like if you love running, don't go out and change your life about this. But just think about how you can look at your daily to-do list and how dopamine centered it is, because we live in a very dopamine centered world that says go, 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 push past your body's limits. And this has really harmful effects on women, making us oxytocin deficient and dysregulating our nervous system. So can you cross off a few of those more dopamine centric habits and take a pause? Maybe this means pausing and doing some somatic practices that involve self-contact, some havening, some Vu breaths, some gentle movement. It can be with yourself. I know lots of us are living in isolation, so I just want to really underline and emphasize that you can do this with yourself if you have pets, cuddling with your cats, right? And then eventually when there is that safety and co-regulating with someone else, that is a physiological necessity for everyone, and especially for women, because we're disproportionately affected by the social nervous system.
There's so much that you just were speaking to that I want to dive into. I think one, starting to look at, some of these broadly recommended like dopamine driving practices. I can already hear people now like, don't take my cold plunge away, but people, they go so hard at these things when it's not necessarily giving us the same motivation and the same reward. And I think that's so interesting to think about. And I also wanted to just reflect on, we talk so much on this podcast about complex trauma at its root is an attachment wound. And that the way, like the path to resolution is relational. And so especially now talking about the female nervous system and the need that we are more driven by the social nervous system and the need for bonding. And that is the way to repair some of these patterns and survival responses. It's so complex, right? Like you were saying, with people with complex trauma, it is often a big ask to have the capacity. And yet we really deeply need that in order to begin to repair. And so I think there's just so much to think about, these small steps that you mentioned of showing up in these practices for ourselves, also not driving into the cultural conditioning of the overdoing and the doing more, and allowing some of that to be slower, gentle, minimum effective dose connection with self, nature, and animals. But I don't know, like, have you seen things, has your practice shifted at all as you've been diving more and more into this? And like, where does that show up in that relational healing in the work that you do?
Yes. And I just want to add on to, you reminded me to mention that dopamine actually lowers oxytocin. I want to make that clear first and foremost. So even in the somatic world, what I see being taught is a lot of like, do this to feel this way. Do this thing by yourself in an isolated bubble, and that's all you need. And now you're regulated. And those tools are highly effective. They are amazing. They can be a game changer. And like you just said, Elisabeth, we require safety and relationship to regulate. Across the board, this is true for all humans. And because the nervous system evolved through mammalian bonding, the nervous system, the newest part of our nervous system, evolutionarily speaking, is the ventral vagal system, which developed through mammalian bonding, primarily through the mother-baby dyad, through mother-baby bonding, breastfeeding, holding, eye gazing. And so our bodies, like the mammal's body through which our nervous system evolved, is the female nervous system, primarily speaking, right? We are then more impacted by that system. So like when I had premenstrual dysphoric disorder, it wasn't until decades later that I found out that progesterone actually promotes social information processing, attention allocation to social information processing. When there's this overactivation of our social nervous system in our luteal phase, this can lead to premenstrual dysphoric disorder. No one was telling me this. I was handed the pill. I was handed, Prozac. And it turns out my trauma, my attachment trauma, was really at play there, making me hyper attuned to everyone else around me and the fawn response and freezing.
Veronica, before you go on, will you just share with our audience, can you elaborate a little bit on what is premenstrual dysphoric disorder?
Yeah, I would love to. So, PMDD is, we joke that it's like PMS's evil twin sister. It's all of your PMS mood swings and symptoms times 1,000. It often comes with really intense, crippling anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. Insomnia was a big one for me. And you experience it typically for a week to 2 weeks before your period, before your menstrual cycle begins. And then the other 2 weeks, you might actually feel fine. And so a lot of women are diagnosed with mood disorders when in reality, they have PMDD, which can very much be caused by unprocessed trauma. And that is not something that doctors are telling women, that no one's being asked, like, well, what's your trauma history? And this goes beyond PMDD into like more symptomatic perimenopause, menopause experiences, right? And there's no perfecting this. To women out there who are like, oh, I better resolve all my trauma before I go into perimenopause, there's no perfecting it, but please keep it in mind that you have other options and that it's very worth your while to invest in trauma resolution and somatics before you go into these big life experiences, transitions such as peri and meno. And for me, also in pregnancy and birth, it was really important too. Yeah, I think I went on a tangent, but
it's been really great. I really enjoyed the tangent. This is a place of the conversation I'm really interested in. You mentioned cuddling isn't safe. That was one of the things you said throughout your rant, and sometimes cuddling isn't safe. And sexual trauma really impacts the oxytocin regulation, and sexual trauma can impair the brain's ability to associate oxytocin release with positive experiences. And that makes intimacy and close relationships really hard. And oxytocin is a crucial hormone for sexual arousal and bonding, like we were talking about earlier. And, for a woman in the world, a lot of women, I don't know a woman in the world who has not experienced a body boundary violation on the spectrum, right? And we talk about them being on the spectrum. And so, when we have a diminished oxytocin response or a dysregulated oxytocin response, that can either lead to a diminished response during intimacy, but it also is connected to hypersexuality and compulsive behaviors as coping mechanisms. Can we talk a little bit about that aspect of?
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah. Yeah. So we know, right, that our attachment stance, our attachment strategies are formed through somatic experiences. We often think of attachment as like, oh, it's just this thing, this theory that we can learn about and put a label on our partner, and then I wear this hat and that's it. And Esther Perel herself has said, like, this is working against us because our nervous system is what holds those experiences that make bonding either feel safe and accessible, or again, a spectrum here, right? Maybe it triggers threat because in the past we had experiences where we were neglected, we were abused sexually, physically, verbally, emotionally. And so it can be really challenging. I think this is one of the reasons why women suffer at, 2 times the rate of anxiety, depression, mood disorders. Outside of there being this big gender gap in research, we're primed for more of that co-regulation. And yet we, across the board, universally, I can agree, Jennifer, that every woman I know has had some kind of boundary rupture. So we have to approach that with a lot more refined sense of gentle approaches, of self-regulation that allows for more co-regulation over time. And so I think it can be super easy to anyone listening out there to like become a course junkie and like hop around from different healing modalities and avoid developing a relationship with one or a few people that you trust in the healing world. And I can't recommend that more. Find someone who radiates empathy and warmth and makes you feel like relationship could potentially be safe versus, a lot of us with attachment trauma, including myself, we might kind of hop around and decide to cherry pick from different healing modalities that emphasize more of like the self-regulation versus relationality. Should really encourage you to find that person or those people that you can develop a long-term, consistent relationship with. That has been so important to have that combination of I'm in this somatic experience of co-regulation over time. That's how we build trust versus this like one and done. I just waved a magic wand and now I'm regulated, right? Yeah.
As you were talking about two needs for the female nervous system, the need for connection and also the need to protect, because so many of us have the experience of body boundary violations. It just brings me back to all of season 3 when we were looking at underneath so much chronic dysregulation and quote unquote disorganized attachment style is this very human need for social safety and attachment. And then also the need to protect ourselves, or this high stress load that attachment carries. And then when you just are layering that now with what you're talking about with the female experience of having a nervous system where that need is amplified, really at a hormonal level for our ability to regulate our hormones, for our brain function, for our health. And then also the stress load is higher because the amount of body boundary violations and threat that can come with that connection is amplified given most of our life experience. You can really see some big reasons why there would be more prevalence of autoimmune or diagnosis of different mental health disorders. And this whole season, we've really been looking at a lot of different mental health diagnoses or physical health outcomes and questioning that a little bit. We did a whole episode recently on borderline personality disorder and what might be underneath there that's driving a lot of that. And so I think beyond just the lack of research, but also just the way that our healing spaces are set up, the way the conversation is going, how do you think all of this impacts women's mental health diagnosis?
Yeah. So much here to unpack. I think that, with women being more likely to be diagnosed with mood disorders, with anxiety, depression, we're 200 times more likely to experience burnout. And if we look at the ways that therapy, coaching, any of the health and wellness practices are set up, they're not contextualized enough in our female experience. The context is, here you are today, let's meet you in your circadian rhythm. It's let's just focus on what's happening for you today, emotionally, somatically, psychologically. When we have this wider rhythm at play, that is the infradian rhythm, and no one's asking about it. I mean, do you have practitioners asking you where you're at in your cycle? Because I didn't. That's something I had to create with my own methodology that I teach now. We ask women when they're pregnant. We ask women if they're pregnant, if they're postpartum, and then we might change something about how we practice, but not really. Do you actually know how to work with the perinatal nervous system? And so when we're looking at the harm that this inflicts on women, it runs so, so deep. So even though we're 2 times more likely to experience depression, less than 30% of research on depression is focused on women. And then research done on depression, only less than 40% of it actually includes women. So the tide is shifting, like it's starting to turn, and we have so much work to do because there's this historical disclusion, but also trivialization of our emotional experience. So the word hysterical, the Greek origin, means wound. And so there's this patriarchal assumption that if you have a wound, that is a nuisance to your life inherently. It's going to cause you emotional hysteria, pain, suffering. And let's go ahead and trivialize women's experiences of emotionality, because let's face it, the patriarchy is terrified of emotions, because emotions, when you feel them, give you power. And so I actually think that our culture is terrified of women. I think that at the root of it, there's this deep fear of if our emotions weren't trivialized, if we were taught how to harness them through our body as fuel for our power, like it's the mama bear in the wild that you don't want to cross paths with. Like our instincts and our power is so intuitive and so incredible, and it's no wonder that I don't think it's a coincidence that that's taken away from us.
Or that we have come into the time of the patriarchy, right? Like you can see, just like what you said, I totally agree with you. They are scared, and that's why they don't know. They have completely tried to, like we were talking about earlier, overlook us. And society has played a profound role in shaping women's mental health. Especially when it comes to sexual trauma, our bodies, body image, diet culture, the bikini industrial complex. And I remember when I was reading Burnout by by the Nagoski sisters, women just have a different low level, chronic level of stress that we are walking around the world in at any given moment. Like it's different to experience, to be in a female nervous system and experiencing the world. And like we're up against cultural norms, societal expectations, gender power dynamics often perpetuate victim blaming, silence. We've been silenced, stigmatized, and especially around, well, once again, just being a woman. And it makes it a lot more difficult for us to seek the care that we need to really receive the support. And like, we have the pervasive nature of rape culture that we have grown up in, normalizing and, like you said, trivializing our emotions and trivializing our sexual experience in the world, and not only trivializing it, but turning it around and using it on us and against us, gaslighting us. And the societal backdrop just really exacerbates women's mental health challenges and trauma survivors.
Yeah, so many of the symptoms that we're taught are just inherent with having a female body are actually a result of our culture teaching young girls to push past what their body actually needs. I don't know about you guys. No one taught me that I would have 2 weeks out of the month where I would need more rest, or that I would need, to tone it down on running at gym class. In fact, when I had debilitating menstrual pain, my gym teacher was like, "Hey, you need to run more." And I was like, "I can't stand up. Like I can't even walk. So that's not going to work." And so how much of our experience is us just being gaslighted and being taught that, like, no, your experience isn't real, because we're much more likely, when we come to doctors in pain, to be considered psychologically fraught, like psychologically we're making up our pain and it's not real, or we're just hysteric, or we're stressed. And it's like, yeah, I am stressed actually, because nobody has taught me how to actually tend to my body. And I see, unfortunately, that pattern happening in somatics too.
I want to jump back for a second and talk about the pathologizing of the emotional experience, because there's something really powerful that you were talking about. And I think, as I'm thinking about my own experience with starting to be able to express emotions somatically, what a long journey that was for me, how scary it was for me, and what I see in so many clients. Yes, 100%, our society, by and large, just really likes to repress emotions. But I also think there's this deep fear, and I won't speak for everyone, but for myself, I know of having been diagnosed with many different things as a young kid, as an adolescent, and into my early 20s, and really having that identity of broken or crazy or too much. And so much of that came with the expression of my emotions. And, when I was expressing the rage, whether that was through self-harm that I took out on myself or like expressing it out into the world when I was flailing around, when the things were being mobilized through my body, I was diagnosed and I was, told that that was not okay. And there was real valid reasons for those emotions to be there. But so you learn over time that it's very dangerous to express those emotions. And I think about the 20 years after that time of my life to where I am now, and really only in the past like 6 or 7 years have begun actually being able to process my emotions somatically. And it was so difficult for so long because my body learned at such a deep level, on a societal level, how dangerous that was to express. And so I feel like so much emotional repression is also rooted in this pathologizing of the emotional experience.
So true, Elisabeth. And thank you for sharing that, because I do think from a really young age, little girls are taught to over control and underreact. We have to put a smile on our face and appease others and push down our fear, push down our shame and be confident. And telling a little girl with CPTS to be confident and love herself, I mean, that just created more shame for me. And I think there's a particular pathology of women's emotions, especially when we look at the stereotypes around, PMS. Like PMS actually wasn't even a term until the 1980s. And then it's only been used against us, not for us. It's being used in workplaces against us to trivialize how we feel, but also stigmatize us as moody bitches. And the thing is, we're meant to be moody bitches. Actually, people benefit from feeling their feelings, expressing them, setting boundaries, and your luteal phase is this built-in container for that. So progesterone making us more sensitive to social information processing. It's like we have like a built-in bullshit detector with people. Like, that's not, like we can really call them out, and ourselves. There's this ability to reflect on, what's coming up within ourselves in our luteal phase. And there's that higher neuroplasticity too. So there's a lot of potential in just this one phase of our cycle that we've been taught is meant to be horrible and cause us emotional pain that's going to be dismissed and pathologized, like you said. When in reality, what I think is going on is like the world itself, like all people themselves have been trained to consider emotions as not important. They need to be deprioritized, logic over everything, rationality over everything. When let's be honest, like over rationalizing a hyper logic habitual way of perceiving the world is a defense. It's, that's a defense against what needs to be processed, and what we don't feel eats away at us and those around us. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I really hope that this conversation helps to de-shamify so much of the pervasive, insidious shame that women specifically have around the experience of being a woman and our emotions. Because I have certainly suffered when I felt I needed to over control and underreact. That causes a lot of issues. Yeah.
Let's talk about shame for a minute. You mentioned it earlier that women experience higher levels of toxic shame. Let's flesh that out a little bit more. We love to talk about shame on this podcast.
Yeah, I know. The layers of it just keep coming. And every time I teach it too, in my containers, like there's just so many women who unconsciously carry it because it's the norm, because it's, oh no, I need my harsh inner critic. I need to feel like I'm inadequate. So I need to perfect, because, shame breeds perfectionism. That's another part of being a woman. I don't know very many who don't have an inner perfectionist. It to some degree, mine manifests different. Like I always thought I wasn't a perfectionist. Again, some of my undercoupling dissociation from shame was there because, I don't know, my socks don't always match, and like I don't do the dishes. Like with stuff, I'm not a perfectionist, but I did suffer from being an emotional perfectionist for a long time, showing up the way I thought people wanted me to. And I had this built-in, like, hyper attuned to reading everyone, every little twitch, every little shift in tone of voice. I have a very refined sense of that. Uh, and then the mirroring. Let me mirror you. Let me make you feel comfortable, appeased. So little did I know that was very much rooted in chronic shame, because chronic shame says you either belong or you don't belong. And let's collect evidence on why you don't belong, because in my childhood, that's how I felt. That was the norm. That was what was familiar to me and to so many women. And when you feel more familiar with not belonging, it's almost like you have these goggles on where you're like, let me collect evidence and prove to myself that that's true. Because, research shows when you have that hyper attunement to facial expression and body language and trauma, we're more likely to read neutral facial expressions when we have trauma as negative. So if it's monotone, if it's, flat affect, that can be really, really triggering for women with trauma, because of that, impact from our social nervous system just being stronger. So, yeah, shame. I mean, I could spend hours on that.
I can relate so much to your flavor of perfectionism. And I think we've talked about this before offline where, my socks don't match. I'm not somebody who's like detail oriented, like as I'm doing things, it's like good enough. Yeah, let's roll with it. But there's these other ways, especially in relationship, like I am an expert perfectionist fawner, and I can be who you want me to be, say the thing you need me to say to keep the relationship safe, to keep that attachment from rupturing, and to avoid conflict at all costs, even when it's like just the slightest bit of disappointment. I'm going to disappoint someone in some slight way. It's different today. Like I've done a lot of work to get here, but I just couldn't articulate the thing that I knew somebody didn't want to hear. And so those inner perfectionism on how I show up and who I am and my ability to regulate and soothe other people's nervous systems, like that's where the perfectionism was. And driven by that deep shame that I'm bad underneath all of this, that is constantly driving that huge stress load in every relationship because of that lack of authenticity, the inability to express boundaries, the overgiving, and just the act all the time, watching, reflecting, figuring it out. It's just a huge stress load.
I think this is a really kind of important time now that we're talking about like borderline and by BPD, and that's all come into the conversation, and perfectionism. For you had a little bit of a warning for people earlier, like you've urged people a couple times in this conversation, Veronica, to get help and to seek support. And I think this is another one of the crucial times in this conversation, because what I have seen in an older population is that years of this dysregulation, particularly around perfectionism, inner critic, and shame, does lead to what presents as borderline and bipolar much older in life. All of this is going to continuously compound and impact your mental health. For the women who are listening here and are relating to this, this is your call to action.
Absolutely. Because when we move through, rites of passage, such as motherhood, peri, and meno, the statistics of us being diagnosed with anxiety, depression, mood disorders goes way up. And in reality, your body is responding adequately, your nervous system is responding adequately to trauma and to the natural fluctuations of those embodied rites of passage. And so the more we can attune to them and embody them, actually be in our bodies feeling as we go, the less likely those symptoms are going to emerge, with a vengeance, because really our body is just trying to get our attention and go, hey, there's something here that, you want to pay attention to. And we have each month, if you're in your reproductive years, there is this built-in integration system for what you do need to process. prior to these experiences. And the more we not just think with that, I'm not a huge like cycle syncing person. I think it's done great things for women, but I often see it being used to like biohack our way through life. Like, let me just trick my body or something. I am really big on actually having a somatic dialogue with your nervous system as you move through each fluctuation and heart rate variability versus like, let me perfect how I'm eating and exercising. Like that has a whole different effect. But you have that built-in roadmap to transmute what you need to transmute each month prior to these bigger shifts. And I really encourage you to follow that as a guide. And yeah.
I love that, and kind of brings me back to this concept that we explore here often, which is that like N equals one. Every single nervous system is unique and different. And it's really about cultivating that relationship with yourself and having that somatic dialogue with your body, with your nervous system. Is this the right amount of stimulus? How am I really responding to this in this time, rather than like following protocols or tracking and having this app? I mean, that's all fine and good. And like people love to collect data on themselves, and I'm all for that. But I think it shouldn't negate that relationship of really feeling into and assessing and reassessing in the moment. How is my body responding to this? What's my rest really like? How do my outputs change with this? And developing that deep relationship of knowing yourself. And
Yes.
I think that's just one of the most important things we can bring to people is there are ways to know yourself, and it's worth taking the time to do that.
Yeah. And, Peter Levine talks about this. Like, we can conceptualize about ourselves all we want. I can tell you, I'm Veronica, I live in Chicago, I'm a Libra, whatever. And that's all fun and a part of the human experience. But conceptualizing about yourself is much different than experiencing yourself. Experiencing yourself happens through your body, and women are given so many reasons to stay in the concept of who we're supposed to be to fit in versus being in the experience of who we are. And so the more you can open up that dialogue with yourself and build relationship where relationship has been lost, whether it's, for me, it was a lot of chronic dissociation from my body, taking baby steps back into being in conversation with my inner experience is what made co-regulation much safer. So I'd highly encourage that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's true. It's really true. It makes co-regulation more safer because it promotes authenticity and sovereignty and trust within yourself. And when you have those things, you are having your own experience and maybe not going into some of the maladaptive behaviors that we've talked about today. That is pretty general for the female nervous system to experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a really great conversation today, Veronica. Thank you so much for bringing your
Thank you
insights
so
and
much.
wisdoms again.
Yes, thank you. It was just a wealth of knowledge and really interesting. What an honor to get to have this conversation and get to learn from you.
Yeah.
Likewise, thank you so much for the conversation and for the work you're doing. And thank you, everyone who's listening. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. It was a good conversation. I really hope women today, maybe just found like they were sitting around a fire.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Tea talk.
Totally. Yeah. It's so true. I mean, at one point in time, women, we bled together, we birthed together, we went through these rites of passage together. And so, yeah, I really want to invite you to lean into that. And yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Amazing. Thank you, guys.